All right, welcome everyone. This is a WSBC webinar on greenhouse gas strategy and reduction. Today is March 17th. If you got on a little early, you heard us talking about St. Patrick's Day. I did represent by wearing some green. So for those of you who are Irish or celebrate, happy St. Patrick's Day. But just welcome to our education series webinar. Today we're going to learn about Sherwin-Williams' strategy in their journey around greenhouse gas tracking. So before we get started, I just have a few announcements and things I'm going to run through, and then I will introduce our speaker for today. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Jessie Servio-Ortiz. I'm the Managing Director of the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council. I have the pleasure of being what I call the chief orchestrator of the WSBC programs in our community. And it's really our goal to advance sustainable practices and principles forward through the power of business. And we do this because we really believe that business has great power and responsibility to be an influencer and change maker towards positive change that can reverse and mitigate climate change, business and societal risks today. So how we do this is really through educating businesses through our webinar series like this and sustainability practitioners by helping you measure and improve your sustainability outcomes and goals, and by connecting you to other businesses and other leaders that are driving change so that we can collaborate together to drive impact and ideally go further faster. So for those of you joining, if you wouldn't mind staying on mute, you will have an opportunity today to come off mute and ask questions. We'll leave about 10-15 minutes at the end for questions. But during the webinar, if you wouldn't mind staying muted. So we are a member organization, and we primarily run and manage programs. You can see sort of some of the logos on the screen, which are some of our programs. And we are owned and operated by WMEP, which is our consulting arm. So we do also help businesses solve specific issues related to sustainability, be it, sustainability program development, determining materiality and metrics or goals. We specialize in water stewardship and certifications, as well as greenhouse gas tracking and so on. So as I mentioned, we're a member organization. You can join as a business, as an individual, or affiliate as the nonprofit arm. What's great is that if you're a business member, anyone in your organization gets access to the benefits. And it's really a cost-effective way to sort of get information, access to education around integrating sustainability practices within your business. So just a few upcoming announcements. I want to remind everyone that our annual Member Cool Choices game starts in April, on April 4th, to be exact, so that's a Monday. So if you haven't already signed up and you want to play, you can find the information in the member portal. For those of you who don't know what Cool Choices is, it's a fun gamification platform where you pick an action or multiple actions every day for 4 weeks. You play in teams, and the goal is really to make sustainable actions in your life, at home, and at work just norm. And our Green Masters program just opened as well. So that link for the 2022 version is also in the member platform. Just FYI that it is there now as of this week. Also, tomorrow is the last day to sign up for our Women in Sustainability Circles. These are peer circles that are just led by practitioners for getting support around different ideas around sustainability. They are themed circles. So the themes are leadership development, corporate sustainability, or business and executive leadership. I will later drop the links in the chat so that you have easy access to the links for this information. Also, I wanted to let you all know April is around the corner, and that is Earth Day, or Earth Month, as we like to call it. And we're taking submissions for how members and how the community are celebrating the Earth Month in this April. And so if you have an event that you want to submit, early April, we are putting together, essentially a newsletter that will go out that's sharing all the ways that our different members and community are celebrating Earth Day. So if you have something to include, there is a way for you to let us know easily through a Google form. And then lastly, just upcoming events. Following this in 2 weeks, on Thursday, March 31st at noon, we're having a greenhouse gas tracking, just a Q&A session. So this is kind of a follow-up to today's session, but it's more interactive. It's really, we have no agenda other than to show up and answer your questions around greenhouse gas tracking. So that will be led by Mark McDermott and Greg Gasper, who are certified to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So if you want or have questions, please join us then. We're doing kind of a why and how of the Green Masters program on April 7th. So this is a bit of a deep dive into the program application, why it's useful for businesses and how to apply and how to best use the program. And then in April, our monthly webinar is on making sense of ESG. And this is really a practitioner-led discussion. We have 3 speakers and it'll be moderated by our founder, Tom Eggert, kind of about, making sense of the environmental, social, and governance movement that's happening right now. And all the upcoming events you can find again at our website. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker today, Doug Mazeffa, Global Sustainability Director for Sherwin-Williams. And Doug is a leading expert in life cycle assessment, corporate sustainability, and green chemistry. Doug's sustainability work has been recognized by the coatings industry, where he was presented with the 2016 Industry Achievement Award from the American Coating Association. He is a sought-after speaker, including lecturing at over a dozen universities, as well as presenting at conferences and webinars like this, on radio shows and TV programs. Doug has been cited as a sustainability expert in major news outlets, including USA Today, CNN, and BBC. Doug acquired his master's degree in corporate environmental management and from Donen Ben Bren School of Environmental Science and Management, and completed his undergraduate work in environmental science and economics at Miami University. So finally, Doug sits on numerous advisory committees, including those in the American Coatings Association, Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, and the U.S. Green Building Council. Doug is also a former All-American National Chess Champion. I had to leave that in. I love that fun fact about you, Doug. And he lives in Cleveland, Ohio with his wife and children. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I am going to turn it over to him to share the Sherwin-Williams story with us.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you, Jesse, and thank you everyone for attending today. Can you see my screen just to make sure?
I can.
Okay,
yep.
perfect.
Looks great.
So, okay, well, thank you folks again. I'm Doug Mazeffa. I'm the Global Sustainability Director of Sherwin-Williams, and thank you for having me and Jesse for that great introduction. So, I'll bear with me. I'll do kind of a few slides on Sherwin-Williams and then sort of get to the meat of things. But really, just what I want to convey here is, large company, very sort of global footprints, 150 years old, 61,000 employees. And, what's a little bit unique about Sherwin-Williams, we are the largest coating company in the world, but we're also one of the biggest retailers in the world with close to 5,000 company-owned stores. And that's usually the stat that really surprises folks because we're sort of a, paints and coatings company, a chemicals company, a retailer, a building product manufacturer. So we sort of straddle a lot of different fences. So, and just from a broad sustainability perspective, and I'll talk a little bit about some of, my journey in sustainability. I've been with Sherwin-Williams about 9 years, but I'm a sustainability practitioner by training. And, before joining Sherwin-Williams, I was kind of in the startup world, doing some consulting for corporate sustainability and environmental footprinting and things like that. So I've, we'll sort of share my perspective on, for folks interested in trying to jumpstart a program in their organization. And, I can share a lot of the mistakes that I've made. It's more of, what not to do, as opposed to, what to do. But our approach to sustainability is, this isn't new to us. I think what was new to us was sort of positioning sustainability very centrally and putting, the different parts of sustainability. It's not just carbon, it's not just, ethics or inclusion, diversity, whatever. It's a very broad definition that also really, that definition varies based on the perspective of the individual or the type of product or the region. So for us, it was sort of pulling sustainability together to sort of move as much as we could in one direction across our different business units, different products, different regions, without stifling innovation or anything like this, and really showing that, sustainability sometimes still has a reputation for higher cost or for lower performance on products, and showing that that may not be the case, and in many cases it's not the case. But also sustainability, it's efficiency. It's, you don't need to be sending half full trucks to distribute things, or unnecessary is economies of scale when you're doing batches of products and things like that. So we've really tried to work hard to focus sustainability around sort of efficiency and trying to embed that into our culture. And then also sort of making sure we look at sustainability from cradle to grave. It's not an iterative improvement in one area and then you're sort of done. It's looking about the ripple effects of, if you make this change, what happens to your supply chain, and really just trying to educate folks that sustainability is a journey. It's not a destination. It's not one and done. This is something that what might be a best practice or a true innovation today could be table stakes, in the short term or midterm future. So trying to really make sure folks understand it's going to evolve, and that's okay. I think this is my last slide, sort of, patting ourselves on the back here, but we rebranded our sustainability efforts last year. We've been doing things like carbon accounting for about 15 years. We've been doing CSR reports or sustainability reports for, I think, 15 or 16 years as well. But last year we really set new long-term targets, goals, some very aggressive targets and goals, launched some new programs. And, all of the little bullets you see here were sort of awards or accolades just in the past few months. And there's been many more. So we really feel like, there's been a positive reception for our new programs, initiatives, and, are very excited to see that. But of course, as other companies catch up, it's we're not trying to rest on our laurels. It's now, trying to continue that momentum to the best of our ability. So some high level, just sort of observations from, my perspective and my, 15, 20 years in the industry. So, for the most part, I want to be candid with folks that, solutions that have worked for Sherwin-Williams and sort of our massive organization, might not be feasible or possible for a smaller organization, or one that maybe only operates in one country or a different type of product. So to say that another way, there's not just one solution to these problems. And, I will talk about our materiality assessment, and that sort of helped us make sure that we're attacking the issues that are most relevant, and fixing things we can address or should address, versus just trying to attack all of the many hundreds of elements of sustainability. But I really can't stress enough, it's understanding your audience or your stakeholders. What are they looking for? What's technically possible? What's going to resonate with them, whether it's on the carbon side, at the corporate levels, product, or just overall sustainability. I like to say internally that if we make the greenest product in the world, but no one buys it, we've solved nothing. And so you need to make sure that, there's a market for it, that, it's a credible, significant, measurable sort of sustainability difference, but then it's also going to resonate with the end users, and is also possible to get there. So, I can't stress that enough. It is not a one size fits all, or, everybody pulls the same lever. There are programs out there, but I'll talk more about, like Carbon Disclosure Project and the Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, and many others that, give great frameworks, but, everyone attacks these things and other aspects differently. And that's okay. So the second bullet, just sort of reiterating that, as I said, I'm a sustainability practitioner by training. When I was doing more of the consulting, and I had the misfortune of sort of leaving grad school right around the 07, 08 recession, probably 99 out of 100 companies we would engage with would, do the virtual equivalent of sort of slamming the door in our face. And, there's still sometimes that muscle memory about it's expensive, low quality, it's a dirty word, whatever it may be. That really is changing. And I'm very excited about that. If folks, I saw on the agenda in a couple of weeks, ESG, environmental social governance, that's been a game changer, especially for publicly traded companies, because now, Wall Street is putting a major premium or critical sort of importance on sustainability. And that's at least new in this formal sort of venue. So it's, the market is changing. There's quickly becoming a lot of regulations around sustainability at the corporate or product levels, especially in regards to climate. So, it's a good time to be looking at solutions, because if you wait until it's a requirement, it can be very expensive or very difficult to then be able to try to catch up at the last minute. So, sustainability, very broad. We sort of, Sherwin-Williams has such a broad portfolio. I think a lot of folks think of us as a paint company. It is, our largest sort of single bucket of products, but really just about everything has a coating on it. And chances are we manufacture, that coating, or at least that type of coating, whether it's cell phone touchscreens, military coatings, anti-fouling coatings, roof coatings, coil coatings, whatever. I mean, I could even like the insides and outsides of cans, like beverage cans, that those are Sherwin-Williams products. So, we've tried to leverage that, if you ask your customer or your audience, what are your top 3 sustainability issues, you'll probably get a very different list from a beverage company versus an architecture firm or a furniture manufacturer, whatever that may be. And so for us, we've tried to set up sort of a rigorous but also sort of dynamic system to leverage the kind of variety of our portfolio to try to marry what our stakeholders and customers, care about in those different regions, or for those different types of products. So, really, it's just doing it in the most effective ways possible, making sure it's going to resonate with folks, that it is a significant difference. And I can't stress it enough. I mean, it's demand is just growing astronomically. And, as a practitioner, it's a very exciting time to be involved with these sort of initiatives. So what you're seeing here, this was Sherwin-Williams sustainability report last year. Our new one will come out in May 1st is the current target. And I just want to show this just because, one of the things that our team is really focused on around sustainability is that a lot of the, people, planet, profit sort of way of speaking to sustainability, it's about sort of doing less bad. And, it's sort of chasing zero, carbon footprints, water footprints, whatever, scopes 1 and 2, it's always doing that sort of less bad, which is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But for, some products, and I would strongly argue coatings are sort of one of them, that, we sort of believe that you can be more sustainable from certainly doing less bad and minimizing your impacts on the environment or society as much as possible, but also sort of that doing more good, and hence the name of this report. And, in the case of coatings, we're protecting substrates that are oftentimes 2 orders of magnitude or more impactful. If infrastructure, bridges, cars, buildings were sort of degrading and every 5 or 10 years, the impact of that would be astronomical. So, we're trying to balance making our products as sort of efficiently and, taking into consideration different chemicals and hazards, carbon footprint and the like, but also not losing that core function. So, and this dovetails into a lot of our life cycle assessment and sort of product carbon efforts that I'll kind of talk about, sort of a later slide. And because that sort of historical way of looking at sustainability is that people, planet, profit, that sort of more footprinting, what we did in the report last year was try to just tweak a little bit of how we spoke to sustainability. So rather than grouping things into people, planet, profit, we have what we call the 3 prints, which are environmental footprint, product blueprint, and social imprint. Really it is sort of the same thing, but we wanted to call out that product piece very specifically because of differences in like scope carbon emissions. And for us, that's by far our largest bucket. Really we're not making most of our raw materials. We're just sort of mixing them and we have the recipe. But extracting and refining some of the materials we use can be very impactful. So being able to talk about products from a life cycle assessment perspective, as well as our operations and the social piece as well, we felt was just a more appropriate way of sort of talking to our portfolio and making sure we're actually getting to a more overall optimal sustainability outcome versus having trade-offs if we don't consider things like performance and end up in terms of products that can't meet the needs of our customers. So within those different environmental footprints, product blueprint, social imprint, we also set goals in these areas. And you'll see in the product blueprint side, last year, or yeah, I guess last year now, it is 2022, time flies. 2021 was sort of, we wanted to get our baselines and have some benchmarks, and there will be goals to come on the product side over time. But on the environmental footprint side and social imprint, last year's report was kind of setting those long-term targets and really making some aggressive commitments, whether it was around renewable energy or sort of our operational carbon and things of that nature. And these are not even all the goals, these were kind of, we felt sort of the most critical of them. And then on the product side as well, we sort of were committed to rolling out our sustainability by design program, which we did launch January 1st this year, which is actually, sustainability being considered by literally every product, our technical organization makes as part of our kind of development process. So it's really putting sustainability on the table for everything. And then, my team really works closely with the labs to sort of make sure we're moving in one direction and going about things in the most appropriate way around sustainability. So in terms of how we're trying to get there with some of these goals, you may have noticed, we were committing to 50% renewable energy and a 30% absolute reduction in carbon based on our 2019 baseline. Historically, we had done efficiency carbon goals. We did shift to absolute for the first time last year. That was a very large discussion, because Sherwin has grown a lot just in the past several years through acquisitions or just other sort of initiatives. So, we initially felt efficiency was sort of the way to go, but the way things have really started to turn in regards to science-based targets and whatnot, we really wanted to make sure, we were consistent in terms of a, well under 2 degree scenario for climate change, and that it wasn't just, efficiency is great, but if we're still having a bigger impact overall, that it might not be the step forward that we really need. And so with an absolute reduction in the renewable energy commitments, we're undergoing we're instituting a VPPA, a virtual power purchasing agreement. And that's, in the kind of the home stretch now of being finalized, and just, building off existing sort of efficiency sort of gains and capital investment. For a lot of companies, it's return on investment. whether it's LED lighting, HVAC systems, or sort of, other ways of doing it. And it sort of becomes a financial as well as obviously a sustainability decision. And one of the key things we'll be launching here in a couple months is our first report under the TCFD framework, the Task Force for Financial Related Climate Disclosure. And this, what's kind of interesting about TCFD for folks that aren't familiar is historically, companies use Carbon Disclosure Project or Global Reporting Initiative or whatever, pick your of the many dozens of sustainability platforms, programs, standards, whatever. Those are mostly, footprint based. It's sort of like, what is your impact on the environment? TCFD is sort of the opposite. It's like, what is the environment's impact on your company's financial readiness? So it's looking at things like, water risks, climate risks, how climate change is going to impact droughts or, heat waves or floods, whatever, and how that impacts your company. Even things like a carbon legislation, having a price for carbon and things like that. So it's been a really fascinating exercise to sort of work through, to kind of go from that just chasing zero and shrinking an impact to like, oh, wow, what are the actual dollars that, we could be impacted by, based on different projections for climate change and things like that. And, I think it's no surprise to folks that it's not a trivial amount of financial impact to a company of our organization. So it's a way of sort of ensuring that the financial side of a company can sort of appreciate that, if we're late to this or slow to climate, that there could be some significant financial repercussions, especially with like carbon tax sorts of scenarios. So before I get into some of our specific climate from a corporate level in disclosure, just to touch on materiality here, because, we have been doing materiality assessments for long before I joined the company, but 2019 into 2020 was the first time we actually did materiality with an external firm and actually talking to external stakeholders, like in our case, investors, customers, looking at competitors. Historically, we had really done more of just the internal interviews and sort of done it that way. And, it was a just tremendously impactful or a beneficial process for us because, I get asked all the time, how do you prioritize what issues to work on? Like, okay, you're putting a lot of resources and horsepower to climate, was that sort of the right decision? What's more important, climate or water or, ethics or whatever? So, it's all important, but this really allowed us to get some, kind of verifiable sort of information with a very clear transparency to sort of understand what we cared about the most internally, like our leadership and different business units, but then also what our customers, investors, academia, regulators, NGOs, and then as I'll show here in a few slides, you basically plot those different sustainability issues in terms of their relative importance to those internal, external stakeholders, and you get a sense of like what resonates with both, and that sort of helps you select what those key issues are. And we you can see here sort of on the right hand side, and this is from an older sustainability report. Truthfully, the things that were kind of high impact, high concern, it wasn't like earth-shatteringly new to us. It was kind of like, oh, product safety and product quality being critical. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But once again, to sort of have sort of this as an end result, and there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of data points that are sort of behind this. And we did do some grouping, so you'll see some different terminology here. But this really allowed us to say, okay, these are the issues we need to be really focusing on. And you'll see we sort of grouped them under, what was under the kind of ESG framework and then product specific. But, it also allowed us to create committees internally. So the bullets to sort of the top right of that slide, we created as part of our sustainability governance overhaul several years ago, a committee that for all of these kind of tier one, top tier material issues. So things towards the top right of this chart, meaning they're both important to, our internal stakeholders, but also external. And, for instance, the third bullet, we grouped, now it's actually, we've changed the name since then, but now it's kind of climate and footprinting. So it's that energy, waste, and emissions piece. And on the employee attraction and retention, that includes, that one bullet sort of towards the top right with the same name. But we also took that as an opportunity to include diversity and inclusion and some of these other, sort of tier two issues, because it's, once again, not that anything on here is not important. It's a relative exercise, but it was sort of allowed us to sort of allocate our resources most effectively here. And this really did take us, probably at least 6 months, probably closer to 9 months. And we'll be redoing this here probably next year. We might start it this year, but we want to make sure, given the rapid changes that are occurring in sustainability, that we don't get too far behind the curve. So in terms of corporate greenhouse gas, tracking, reporting, and sort of strategy, back to one of my earlier points of there's not just one solution for everyone. The truth is there's just a variety of ways you can do it. And, so the perspective I'm sort of giving is from a publicly traded multinational, global big company. So, I just kind of want to keep stressing that, for us, we started with Carbon Disclosure Project. We've been doing that since, I believe, 2006. We'd even worked with EPA prior to this, is before I joined the company, with, I believe it was our Climate Leaders program. And, that really just using CDP and doing a CSR report up until maybe 5 years ago, that was sort of, what we were focusing on. And we had sustainability projects at our plants, and, we're setting goals, more year over year, sort of efficiency improvements. But, CDP was sort of that table stakes sort of disclosure that we did. So for those of you familiar with CDP, they've sort of evolved their program. The way they score it has changed a lot over the past decade. So we've sort of taken a renewed focus towards CDP and adding things like scope 3 emissions, where for a long time we only did scopes 1 and 2. And CDP is starting to really focus a lot more, not just on reporting, but sort of managing impacts and being able to, have programs and goals in place to sort of go beyond manage, sort of, fix, I'll say, or minimize your impacts. So the nice thing about CDP, it take it from someone who's done the disclosure himself, both from the startup world and then also for a big company. And now, luckily, folks much smarter than I in the company do it. They have great documentation. There's instructions. They point to a lot of tools. So one of the I'd say most positive things is the barriers to entry. Sort of when I joined the sustainability industry, I did life cycle assessment, kind of was my educational background. Like you really had to be a practitioner, have any chance of being able to do this, or hire a consultant and spend a considerable amount of money. Now, if you're willing to sit down with the documentation and the instructions and learn the tools, there are ways out there you can start doing these disclosures. And it's a lot less time consuming and sort of training prohibitive than it used to be. I don't want to trivialize it, though. It's still a lot of work, but the barriers to entry are significantly lower than they used to. But be prepared to read. I think it could be over close to 1,000 pages of documentation if you sort of add up all the different little guides. The big shift that's sort of occurring is CDP, although they do look at some of the management and risk sides of things, really a lot of the focus in the investor community has been on this TCFD that I've spoken to a few times, and looking more about what the impact of climate change is on the business. And so the good news is TCFD and CDP are, there's strong alignment there, and they're certainly working fairly hand in hand to try to not reinvent the wheel, because for those of you on this call that have to respond to sustainability questionnaires or the different platforms out there, or customer inquiries, there's a lot of survey fatigue that's out there. So the more alignment excuse me, and harmonization we can see in these platforms, the better. So, CDP from, I would say, a sort of large company perspective, you know, you should be doing it. There's really sort of no excuse at this point. And TCFD is sort of, something that looks to be sort of the future as well. And one thing I should mention also is, especially for scopes 1 and 2, where it's a lot of, it's direct and indirect emissions, a lot of utility companies provide that information, or are very, very able to. It does depend on, which utility providers and things like that. But there are a lot of resources there as well, especially if you're using sort of a major or several major provider. So in some cases, the data is relatively turnkey, but there usually are going to be pockets of facilities you may find where it becomes more of a manual exercise. But once again, every year I feel like there's efficiencies, at least we observe, with some of these disclosures. So, the other note of this is, it's kind of the footprinting to the risk side of things. There's been a number of executive orders under the Biden administration that if you have a like preferential, forgive me on the exact terminology, but if you're like a government, if you sell a lot of products to the government, there's like a preferential connotation some companies have. And to get that, theoretically, you need to already be doing things like TCFD and climate financial risk. And in Europe, we're seeing some similar table stakes for sustainability reporting and the like. But there's also been a lot of movement very, very recently about the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, making this a legal requirement for publicly traded companies. And it's unclear. I think there's going to be their recommendations coming out within the next several weeks, but it could just be reporting impacts, but it could also be more of that risk, that financial sort of piece of it. So, for those of you involved with publicly traded companies, that this is quickly becoming a reality. And even though I'm usually fairly, I would say, confident in the glacial pace that regulations sort of move, we're not seeing that with a lot of these issues anymore, whether it's US or Europe. I mean, really, things are coming very quickly, whether it's climate or around certain materials of concern or whatever, those sort of key sustainability issues. So it's quite a fascinating time to sort of be involved. So, in terms of how, what mechanism, we communicate these sorts of deliverables, CDP, TCFD, GRI, sustainability report, really, it's once again, it's sort of that unsatisfying, it depends. For the corporate sort of disclosures, so like those climate CDPs and whatnot, obviously through the platforms, so on CDPs, through their portal, you kind of sort of have to, we also post a variety of information on our websites. The product side, which I'll sort of close things out with, is that one's very different. Then you really have to put yourself in the mindset of who's using it or what are they using this information for. And my sort of observation is you really can't post things in enough places. I mean, in a perfect world, they're all sort of linked, so you don't have to keep, whenever there's a change, re-uploading things. But more often than not, I would recommend, even if I was like an external consultant, just posting something on a corporate page, sort of being done with it. That there could be cases where that's good enough, but we're finding a more proactive strategy is really critical, because folks, just if your website's not great, they might just not find it, and it can really get quite tricky. And so when I gave an example on the last bullet there of, especially for like LEED credit eligibility, the LEED Green Building Program, I mean, we might post some of our LEED eligible like deliverables on like a dozen places. And, it's not that, I love having, folks on my team having to keep updating these things. It's just, we have seen that some customers love platform X, others love platform Y, others go to this part of our website, but it's, there's not even a majority that go to any one site. So for us, it's been more sort of that getting in the minds or the perspective of a customer and trying to sort of find, what reasonable places would be without going too crazy. Obviously, you can't be everywhere in the world, but, really focusing on, sort of the key ones and hitting 90 sort of percent of them if you can. So one thing I wanted to do, so that's some of the kind of the corporate perspective. I was going to close out on the life cycle assessment side. I wanted to see if there's maybe, if we have some questions here on the corporate side before I dive into products, because it is sort of a different sort of terminology. So if there's any questions on the sort of corporate side or what we've sort of done at SW, I'd be happy to address those now, or otherwise I can keep plugging along on the product side.
I guess I have a question if you have a second.
Sure, please.
Hi. So I'm from WC Energy Group, which I think a bunch of people on the phone are probably familiar with, but maybe not you. So we're the major electric utility in Wisconsin and gas utilities in 4 states. So this, I mean, and I do pretty much everything you're doing there. Can you just talk a second about investor pressure you're getting to like, and how does that influence what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I had mentioned a little earlier, like it was a game changer for us. We were doing a lot before, but what I would say was most interesting about the investor pressure was, I'll say, semi-facetiously, so ESG, environmental social governance, is sort of like, what we call the investor sustainability, because in sustainability, we need more acronyms and terms to sort of mean the same thing. But, you've probably observed that, they don't all use the same frameworks. They generally will use only publicly available information, which is key, because in our case, we were very deliberate with, we could have a world-class program in like emergency response or something. But we felt like it was maybe giving away competitive information to sort of share a ton of information on it. And then some of these investor ESG sustainability rating groups would give us a 0 for this criterion. And it's like, well, wait a minute, we're actually great at this. But if you're not talking about it, you don't generally get credit for it. So for us, it was sort of having to learn, there's a variety of these out there, Sustainalytics, ISS, MSCI, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, and many, many more. There's just dozens and dozens. As part of our materiality, we sort of looked at, what did our primary shareholders care about? And that, we never want to score chase. And that's something that's been sometimes difficult for us when we talk with like leadership, is these are subjective scores. And really, one of the things we've seen is the best predictor of our score, because oftentimes they're relative based on your industry, is what industry they think we're in. So we could be chemicals, specialty chemicals, paints and coatings, building materials, retail. There's another one I'm forgetting. So they would ask us questions like about mines we operate, and we couldn't say not applicable. It was like an all or nothing sort of thing. But it's like, we don't operate mines. What do you want us to do here? So, there's been an education sort of component, both internally and externally. But for us too, it's been, sort of trying to stick to our guns of, if we do what is best for, no one knows our products or our business better than we do. Not to say we're perfect, far from it, but, we'll assess our impacts with, the best data we can get. And, we will do the things that will make the biggest difference for us and our customers, our investors. And, if we stay that course, we'll see those improvements via these different scores. But it's, you feel like you're playing whack-a-mole a little bit. So, literally, I'm not even joking. This morning, I had a major investor email me, or a major shareholder, I should say, on sustainability. And, they listed sort of a number of things they want to talk about. And one of the topics is something we've never been asked about ever. So it's, I guess I'm not sure how helpful I'm being with this, but it's something that's rapidly evolving, that there's no sort of one right way of doing it. But, what I would encourage is just kind of being as deliberate about what's sort of the best steps for your company via something like the materiality, versus being too reactionary to any individual sort of approach. Because if we just chase scores, I can tell you right now, we would not be having the benefits or the, as big of a reduction in our impacts as if we went the way they're prescribing.
Okay, thank
Any
you.
other, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I said, thank you.
Oh, no problem. Any other questions before, and I will make sure to leave a little bit of time to at the end. Okay, hearing nothing. So, you know, on the product side, you know what, in full disclosure, again, I'm a life cycle assessment practitioner, so it's you know, my favorite tool in the toolkit. You know, we do see it as generally the kind of most credible way of doing it. Not that like greenhouse gas protocol others are bad at all. It's just LCA is just sort of that and more. It's you know, it lets you see trade-offs to other environmental indicators or toxicity or things like that. So, you know, once again, one of the similar threads to the corporate side is, you know, LCA used to be just monumentally expensive, and it's still not cheap by any stretch of the imagination necessarily. But, you know, there are tools out there that can kind of help you get a, you know, a reasonable starting point, you know, feel for the impacts of your products, or at least where those the big impacts occur. So is it the raw materials? Is it transportation? Is it packaging, or whatever? So, you know, that I'd say is good news. And, you know, what we're seeing a lot of companies doing, of really almost any size, is start to try to bring this expertise in-house, because although some of the software that's available, and once again, there's spreadsheet-based tools I've listed, Gabby and SEMA are kind of the two, I'd say, primary LCA platforms that folks use globally. You know, if you're able to bring it in internally, you will have sort of that upfront cost of the software and things like that. But with a lot of other programs out there, it's sort of like you're just paying the same amount over and over again. And you know, this is what Sherwin-Williams did with my original position in the company, which was mostly geared around LCA. Was they sort of saw, well, we don't want to pay somebody to do this every time. We want to do a life cycle assessment, and you know, it's not a huge number before you start actually coming out ahead in terms of savings versus doing these externally. So I don't want to trivialize it, but I think as the tools and the approachability continues to get better, it's going to be a more and more viable strategy for companies of you know, really any size. It's still, you know, a work in progress. There's still kind of data limitations, quality control, things like that. You know, as an LCA apologist, you know, there is no one right way of doing LCA. There is no overall measure of uncertainty in things like life cycle assessment. So you do need to be a little bit sort of careful, because we are seeing, you know, the Federal Trade Commission and, you know, basically lawsuits about kind of accuracy of these sorts of, you know, 10% smaller carbon footprint or whatever sorts of claims that are out there. So, you know, they can be data intensive. If you're doing these sorts of techniques, you're looking at impacts from cradle to grave of your product, even things you might not control, like if it's distribution or how someone uses it or disposal. But, you know, it really is the only way to get a comprehensive look at the environmental footprint of your kind of products. And, you know, some high level bullets on life cycle assessment specifically. You know, it's giant mass balance. This isn't a new thing. I feel like in the US, it's still not super familiar, but it's actually a technique that's been around since the 1960s. You know, I've been doing it for 15 years, so it's certainly, you know, been around in some industries like automotive, and a lot of like food and beverage have been doing this for quite a long time. But in others, it's maybe only been in the past 5 or 10 years. And you know, LCA, it does cover the carbon sides of things. It's you know, it's a tremendously powerful tool, especially if you sort of know its quirks. But you know, where I would recommend a bit of care is, you know, it's more than just carbon. If you fixate too much on carbon, depending on what your products are and things like that, you can end up in some suboptimal places, or in some cases actually end up worse than you were because of another issue you've created. So one of the strengths of LCA is that it kind of is a relatively consistent process that has a variety of ISO standards that it makes you use, and it'll give you those sort of hotspots. So if you get a 1% carbon reduction, but it's coming at the expense of being, you know, 100 times worse in every other indicator, that might not be something you sort of want to consider. but it is data intensive, like a lot of these things are, and it's assumption heavy. You never have perfect data, so you need to sort of make assumptions about maybe how someone's using your product or disposing of it, or certain transportation distances. And it's a transparent enough exercise that it's reasonably battle tested. But if you don't have good assumptions, you can get yourself in trouble with LCA. And this illustrates, cradle to grave. These are sort of the big ticket items or phases you consider in a life cycle assessment: raw materials, manufacturing, packaging, transportation, use, and disposal. So when I say cradle to grave, this is sort of what's in scope. And one, just for folks that may be hearing terms like LCA, embodied carbon, environmental product declarations, they're all related. And I've listed some either regulations or programs like LEED, for example, where really these are quickly becoming requirements in some cases. So, I don't think we're too far away from things like life cycle assessment being sort of similar to a safety data sheet, where you're going to have some information available, even if it's just carbon. But, life cycle assessment, it is sort of the methodology. Environmental product declarations are still done using a life cycle assessment. There's just sort of an extra standard that they get sort of validated against. So I kind of liken them to sort of the Rolls Royce of LCA, because there's sort of an additional quality control step. Embodied carbon is something we see that's huge in the kind of building world, where that's sort of like part of the life cycle. It's what are the carbon impacts? So it's just carbon. It's not the other indicators, but it's the carbon impacts to basically make the product. And in some cases, maybe install it or something. So it's not cradle to grave. It's what we would call kind of cradle to gate or cradle to sale, something like that. So I'm not saying it's bad, but folks, oftentimes use these things interchangeably. And although there's a lot of overlap, there's some really big differences. And if you focus solely on something like embodied carbon, you can have sort of a race to the bottom where the greenest solution becomes like the most disposable sort of product. So like I joke, like an HVAC system, if you look at embodied carbon, having a gerbil on a wheel or something, it's or for paint, a bucket of water with a pebble floating in it. It doesn't say anything about if it works or not. It's just, what is the lowest impact per kilogram or per gallon, but it doesn't consider sort of how much product does it take to do the job, how long does it last, operational energy, things like that. So it's a critical and it's important, and there's a lot of value there. But, we still see a lot of confusion with folks using embodied carbon as sort of a life cycle assessment or an environmental product declaration. And see, I'm running low on time here. So just a couple more slides I have. I'll kind of just really quickly touch on this. When you do LCA, the multiple indicators, and so this kind of visualizes if each column is a material, in this case, a packaging material, each row is an impact. So you just see rarely are you going to come out best across the board. But in this example, things like cost, availability, performance, even waste aren't factored in. And so for like food packaging, waste is going to be a huge issue, especially with single-use plastics and stuff like that. So, when you look at these, like it looks like I'm giving you so much information with all the different indicators, but, you really have to look at the big picture holistically to make sure you're not taking a step sideways or even a step backwards in an LCA. LCA, EPD kind of comparability is still challenging. The takeaway is you need to make sure you're controlling for all the noise. So like a Sherwin-Williams LCA versus one of our competitors, unless we use the same software, the same databases, same versions of things, I mean, you don't know if the difference in results is because of just those other databases versions versus something actually about the product itself. So this is kind of one of the biggest hurdles, we're sort of seeing is there's an instinct just to pick the smaller number, but in actuality, the results might just be due more to sort of like pseudo random chance. And once again, there can be legal implications for this. So LCA is I mean, it's the gold standard. It's getting better. The data, these gaps are actually being worked on, but it's still a work in progress. Still a lot of uncertainty. They're very technical, and it's sometimes challenging when they're sort of designed for folks that aren't familiar with LCA, but it can be very challenging to interpret them, especially if you're looking at multiple manufacturers of sort of LCA sort of work. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over just real quickly to Susan to sort of introduce herself, and apologize for running a little bit long here.
No problem. I will keep this really, really short. I just wanted a chance to say hello. I'm the local area resource for Sherwin-Williams. So my name is Susan Sinkowski, and I'm happy to say I'm a new member of the Wisconsin Sustainability Council. I'm an architectural account executive with the Sherwin-Williams Company and have been with the company for about 20 years. My role is basically supporting architectural and the design community. I live in the world of construction documents, so chasing down those construction related LEED and green certifications is certainly every day for me. But if questions come up about coatings or paint or color, please know I'm a local resource. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Susan. And yeah, with that, happy to answer any questions folks have. And yeah, once again, sorry for running a little bit long here.
Hi, could you speak a little bit to how either Sherwin-Williams does this or how you've seen it done in other companies, how they manage capital expenditure for carbon and energy reduction projects? So specifically a couple examples or topics. Operations might have ROI of 1 to 2 years, and you feel like you're behind the 8 ball if you've got a project that's 4, 5, 6 years. And then, do you like to see operations have the budgets kind of embedded within their own business, or would you prefer to see the total corporation with like a bucket of money and you get to allocate it based on your analysis of the projects?
Yeah, no, great questions. On the CapEx side, for us, it was really because, yeah, we obviously had similar sort of with ROI, you're looking for a certain payback period. And with a lot of sustainability projects, you might not be coming in and hitting those numbers. What's been the game changer for us is sort of that, as we started laying the foundation for what's become sort of our TCFD report, where showing that you need to consider other implications. Big companies, we can't change on a dime. So if there's a carbon tax gets, put in place, even if it's 5 or 10 years down the road, we know what those CapEx hits are. And so it was really that way of looking at it, and the financial community saying, hey, sort of also saying to our leadership, we're going to consider this as a risk, for it. So you folks need to show us you're understanding it. And so that sort of flipped the script a bit and has helped us sort of factor those in those decisions. In regards to where the money is, it is obviously going to vary on the companies. For us, we sort of do it a little more towards that central location, because it makes sure we're hitting those kind of most efficient uses of that and being as consistent as possible. But I could see other models where the other example, the individual business units could actually be better. But for us, given the diversity of our portfolio, even our facilities and operating our own distribution, we find it's cleaner if there's some of the corporate folks have a lot of involvement.
Great question. I know we're sort of at time. I think Bob had one question, so I'll just throw it back to you, Doug, if you have a minute to take one more question. I know. Yeah. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks, Jesse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this might be a yes or no with a follow-up discussion, but are you doing anything in scope 3 emissions?
Yeah. So we've disclosed scope 3. I think it was our 3rd or 4th year doing it via Carbon Disclosure Project. In the past, we are working on trying to find the best way to approach scope 3 goals and targets. Obviously, with things like science-based target, for us, scope 3 is 90% of our emissions, and it's really no surprise. So we're I'd say, very aware of what our impacts are. We've leveraged life cycle assessment to really go deeper than what a lot of the other tools, where it's more of just like dollars spent on something and multiplying it by a factor. So we feel like we've got a good handle on it. But for us, given sort of that diversity, which I've said is sort of a benefit, it makes it trickier for us to sort of what's a reasonable goal, given that we have, many thousands of suppliers and tens of thousands of raw materials and things like that. And these are all different shapes and sizes of organizations. So, that's going to be a critical thing for us, but it's going to be more of a journey, I think, than anything else.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to the Sherwin-Williams team for coming today. This is very thorough and informative, Doug. So I really appreciate your time and all of the information. This has been recorded, so I will share that out, and it will be posted in our member portal for, I know there were a few people that messaged saying they couldn't make it today, so it'll be available for them as well. So thanks, everyone. And
Thank you.
have a great rest of the St. Patrick's Day in your week.
You as well. Take care. Thank you, everybody.